Good evening. I want to thank you for withstanding the weather and coming out, because this is a very, very important night. I wanted to talk about Jersey City Together and talk about the fact that we are not just about one issue. We have been working on many fronts, and most notably in the last couple of weeks we've been meeting with our education committee. They've been meeting with the school board and the superintendent of schools to help find money for our school system. Our school system is $100 million underfunded. $100 million. We found $5.3 million that the school board could access, and we helped by going to meetings there, help them to vote to appropriate that money to help with the schools. Some of our schools, and we've been working around the issue with Bayfront. That is a property owned by a Honeywell, and it is on 440, and you may, it had been filled with chromium. It's been remediated, it's been cleaned, and now we're working with the mayor and the city to make sure that that property has housing that is affordable for residents of Jersey City. And so we have been busy. Also, we've been busy nationally, partnering with our national organization, Industrial Arts Foundation, IAF, to work on the issues of gun proliferation across our nation. And we're also glad to say that our mayor has been taking the lead in that, making sure that with movements like Do Not Stand Idly By, making sure that something is done about the ease of getting guns on our streets. And finally, we are talking to not just the school board. We're trying to hold people accountable. We've been talking to the mayor's office. We've been talking to members of the city council. We've been engaging members of Fortune 50 clubs, companies throughout our city. And we're here tonight because we want to talk about a landlord who owns property directly across the street from where we are tonight.
My name is Liz Fisher, and I'm a tenant just across the street in a building owned by a guy named Joseph Ehrman, who you will be hearing a lot about tonight. I'm also a law student, and I'm a member of Jersey City Together's Housing and Homelessness team. Tonight is about action. Tonight is also about accountability, but most of all, tonight is about results. Last year, we took action against one of his worst, most abusive landlords, Tenant, formerly known as River Edge. We heard hundreds of stories. We found collapsed ceilings, floods, black mold, rats, bed bugs, rent control violations, bogus evictions, and harassment. 1,750 housing code violations were issued against Trendy because of this campaign. And Trendy Management sold off 80 of their 140 buildings. This seemed like real results to us. But over the last year, as we knocked on doors in these same buildings and listened to tenants about what had happened in the last year, the reality set in. For many of these tenants, nothing had changed. The results that these tenants deserved had not materialized. And that's because landlords like Trendy are a dime a dozen. Many of the landlords who took over were just as bad as Trendy. They thought they could return to business as usual, breaking the law and mistreating tenants. Last year, Mayor Fulop, you walked with us through 205 Monticello Avenue. You were disgusted by the conditions you saw there, and you promised swift action from housing code enforcement. And in the days that followed, hundreds of violations were issued against the landlord. But we went back a year later, and there were bloody handprints on the wall of the lobby. You can see behind me, and for the folks in the pews, it's on the screen. I'd also like to show you a photo of 590 Bergen Avenue, which is another former trendy building. What you see in this photo, which is right over there and on the screen, it's not just trash, it's raw sewage. A pipe in the building burst, and the landlord refused to fix it. Imagine coming home to that smell every day. These are not the results that tenants deserve. These landlords have not gotten the message. But perhaps most worrisome is my landlord. Less than a week after our action in June, Trendy sold 35 of their buildings to my landlord, Joseph Ehrman. He uses different names: Optimum Property Management, Six Borough Rentals, Golden Apple, Golden Blossom, but it's all the same guy. And as you'll hear tonight, whatever faceless LLC Joseph Ehrman is hiding behind, the behavior is the same. In almost every case, long-term tenants are getting pushed out, tenant complaints are getting ignored, and our rent control law is getting mocked. Right across the street where I live, there are 128 apartments. Every single one has an illegal rent. Every single one. It's Trendy management all over again. Except, unlike Trendy, who lied on their city filings, Ehrman's just flat out ignoring the law and not filing at all. Meaning that until we started door knocking, the city had no idea that tenants were getting overcharged $200 and $300 a month. So, if tonight is about results, Mr. Mayor, we need to reckon with the failures of the last 14 months. We need to make sure the future is different. This time, the city's enforcement agencies cannot view ramped up enforcement as a temporary inconvenience. We need to see a new day. We need to send a message to landlords loudly and clearly. Based on our meeting with you last week, Mr. Mayor, we are hopeful about this vision becoming reality. We're hopeful, but we're also skeptical because we've gotten promises before. From our work in the last year, we see 3 major structural changes that must be made immediately. Number 1, the city's Office of Landlord-Tenant Relations, which is charged with enforcing rent control, is an utter joke. Landlords talk privately about our city as the Wild West. With one of the best rent control laws in the country, which you just heard about earlier tonight, there is zero enforcement and zero proactivity. This has to change tomorrow. And we don't have to look far for good examples. In Union City, the mayor sends a letter to every rent control department 3 times a year, warning them that landlords try to illegally raise the rents and telling tenants how to figure out if they're being taken advantage of. Those Union City landlords know that if they break the law, the city is coming for them. We need to send the same message. Housing code inspections. Last year, when we shed light on Trendy Management's shameful treatment of its tenants, there was an initial flurry of inspections, but after that, it was 2 inspections of Trendy buildings per month. What were these inspectors doing the rest of the time? And number 3, we know that one of the best ways to preserve affordable housing and enforce the law is to make sure tenants have attorneys when they go to court. There are 20,000 eviction cases filed in Hudson County every single year, 5,000 in Jersey City alone. Do you know how many nonprofit housing attorneys there are in all of Hudson County? We counted them. There are 4. 20,000 evictions, 4 attorneys. That's 5,000 cases an attorney. That math does not work. And I'll tell you why this is critical. Because the assistance of an attorney stops 77% of evictions. I'll say that again. The assistance of an attorney stops 77% of evictions. Those are real results. Preventing evictions prevents homelessness, it preserves affordable housing, and it keeps families together. We need to follow the example of New York City and Newark in making sure every single tenant has a lawyer when they face eviction. Later, we'll talk about 2 ways to pay for this. We are hopeful, Mr. Mayor, that tonight will be a step in the right direction on all of these issues. We are hopeful that we will see a new day. But tonight, we condemn the decades-long history of not enforcing rent control, not enforcing the housing code, and drastically underfunding legal services. The status quo is unacceptable. We're going to start with some stories. We want you to hear from tenants of my landlord, Joseph Urban, a guy who just can't seem to get enough LLCs. Mr. Mayor, he treats this city like it's a joke, and he thinks he is above the law. Prove him wrong. I'd like to welcome our first tenant to share his story, Andre Campos.
Good evening. My name is Andre Campos. I'm a student working full-time in downtown restaurant scene in Jersey City. These pictures reflect the consequences of inaction. I've dealt with holes in my walls, neglected piles of trash, mice, horrendous bedbug problem that will follow me for the rest of my life. Let me paint you a picture about what it's like living in one of Airman's buildings. The first issue we have is heat. Heat comes on seemingly at random. Some days it's so cold I see my breath. Other days I wake up sweating. I call, email the management company, no response. Tenants are forced to control the heat through the boiler room, which is unlocked, which is so not safe. However, this past winter, things got really ugly when a pipe burst above my kitchen. The management company hired incompetent outside help to fix the apartment above mine. This led to the wrong pipe being hit and causing havoc throughout the whole building. Sewage water flooded my apartment through the ceiling. The only way to lessen the flood was to turn off the water, but nobody knew where the main pipe was. So they cut more holes in my ceiling, the walls, and the kitchen. My apartment was left with an ongoing leak, which I had to call out of work to manage for 3 days straight. Buckets of water, non-stop water. We were given this promise every day for 10 days that, oh, don't worry, the guys are coming. Don't worry, the guys are coming. It took 39 days for my apartment to return to its original state. It created weeks of trauma, unfinished business, and hundreds of dollars worth of damages. After months of waiting, this week, this has happened in February, they offered me $100. $100.
Hello, good evening. My name is Aura, and I'm a visual arts teacher in Newark. I've also lived across in Duncan Avenue for the past 16 years. Jersey City is my home. I'm a native here, been here 38 years, and I'm very proud of my city. My landlord is the same as Andre's, except he's owned my building a lot longer, and they don't call themselves 6 Borough, they call them Optimum Management. Over the years, I've watched my landlord abuse and intimidate my neighbors out of their rent-controlled apartments. 10 years ago, they would shut down an elevator for 2 months at a time, have it work for a week, have it not work for another month, have it work for another week, have it not work for another month, until all of the senior citizens that had to almost climb up 7 flights of stairs got tired of going up and down with their groceries or their food or anything that they needed, and they just decided one by one to leave. They refused to make repairs, leaving holes in the walls and ceilings. There were big water bugs and things in the laundry thing downstairs. And one by one, the tenants and the neighbors were just like, there's no help that they can do, and there's nothing that they can possibly do to fight all the lawyers and different things. So they just left. And then they would fully renovate the apartments and then raise the rent ridiculously. So instead of complaining, I tried to stay quiet. I lived with holes in my walls, shoddy repairs and horrible paint jobs with chipping lead paint around my windows that I was breathing in for years. I didn't want to lose my apartment that cost less than $800 per month. But then last year, Optimum came for me too. It started in the fall of 2017 when there was an infestation in our building. I received a notice on my door that I needed to be home in my apartment for an extermination treatment. It would be the 3rd time that my apartment was ignored and skipped. I called the super early in the morning before the pest control was to come just to make sure my apartment was on the list so they could stop saying that they kept on not being able to serve my apartment. When I called the super to find out why the pest control guy didn't show up because it was getting late once again, I was told that he already left for the day and was not going to return. They sprayed every other apartment in the building. So then when the problem came to my studio, I was furious because it was their fault and I knew that they did it on purpose. It took 4 months to spray my apartment and deal with the problem. I kept a record of everything. I made it a point to keep all the emails I had sent, photographs and videos that I took. I stayed home from work just to try to get it resolved, but in the end, all I got was an eviction notice. After Optimum sent a complaint to the health department claiming that everything was my fault. They claimed that I hadn't allowed access to my apartment, even though I had photos of them inside my apartment. They called all of my possessions and things that I did for preparation as garbage and debris. The landlord tried to evict and did indeed sue me. because he said that I was responsible for the whole entire building. When in truth, they did this to me deliberately just to push me out, so that they wouldn't have to try to buy me out. They ruined my life, my property, and my ability to rest so I could serve my students. So every day as I was waking up just to make sure that I was in a good mood to help all of my students, I would be thinking about, am I going to be homeless in the next week? So far, I've avoided eviction, and some of the issues in my apartment have now been addressed. But Mayor Fulop, you need to make an example of Optimum Property Management in 6 Borough like these people. They think intimidation, shaming, and bullying is the way to do business in Jersey City. They think ignoring the law is fine because they do it daily. 5,000 in Jersey City alone. After missing work for 3 separate court dates, and after everything was dismissed, all they could say to me with their very high-end, expensive attorneys was no hard feelings.
Sam and I live just around the corner in 1 Britain Street. And our landlord, you guessed it. It's Joseph Urban and 6 Borough Management. A few weeks ago, someone from Jersey City Together knocked on our door talking about rent control. It's always seemed to us that our rent was $1,650 per month, with rent control and in a building with a slew of issues like ours. Mold, bed bugs, no heat for days with children in our apartment building. 4 different superintendents in less than 2 years. Unreturned security deposits for previous tenants who left. Threatening lockouts for untimely appointments. Even within the last week, we've been informed that our building is now being managed by another company owned by Ehrman, Golden Apple. In the face of all these issues in our building, we organized as tenants. We gathered signatures, we sent petitions to proactively address our issues, one by one. But months have gone by and we have received no responses. So, when Jersey City Together said that property owners like ours are pushing people out and raising rents illegally, we decided to dig. We came to a meeting here in St. Paul's and found out that the last rent in our apartment is $940 per month. One of our neighbors who's paying $1,500 should be paying $950. Another one paying $1,450 should be paying $900. This is insane. If, like the lady from the Waterfront Project says, we may be eligible for back rent and triple damages, we're talking about a few $100,000 in back pay owned by tenants in my building alone. Now we found out that Ehrman just doesn't even bother to file the paperwork in any of its buildings. How many millions of dollars does he owe tenants in Jersey City? And the city's landlord-tenant office knows that he's not filing the paperwork? Are you kidding me? What kind of enforcement operation is that? Mr. Mayor, every single apartment in our building was affordable. Every one of it. The same for ours building and Andrew's building. And you wonder why we have an affordable housing problem in Jersey City? It's time for action. Now, our city cannot wait any longer.
Mr. Mayor, you've made a number of positive commitments to us in the last few weeks. To join us again in a month for a follow-up. To conduct outreach in every ward of the city focused on tenants' rights with the Waterfront Project and us. You've committed to digitize the rent control documents to bring that office closer to the 21st century. And we know there's new leadership coming into the Housing Code Enforcement Division and new staff in the Rent Control Office. Mr. Mayor, you've heard a lot tonight about Joseph Ehrman, 6 Borough and Optimum Property Management. They've ignored the law, and every violation of the rent control law carries with it a $2,000 fine or even 90 days in jail. If you look at the hundreds of rent control violations, we've already found his 43 properties. We're talking big money. By our estimate, it's at least $800,000 in violations, probably more. In the next few days, we'd like you to take a pilot enforcement action aimed at Ehrman and his 43 properties that sends a message to the other landlords. Will you commit to doing that?
Yes, absolutely. We will do that immediately.
We want to take a few minutes to talk about the steps you've taken and plan to take to reform and modernize the way the city enforces rent control. But for us, we think that part of that work must be new leadership around the enforcement of rent control. Someone who can lead this work and make it a priority for the city. Someone that can send a message to landlords that they're going to be held accountable. Are you committed to making these changes in leadership and changes in that office? And can you walk us through what that's going to look like?
Yes, so first, absolutely. I recognize the same way you recognize that the tenant landlord and the enforcement mechanisms for the city have been weak for decades. And one of the things that we've been talking about together with Jersey City Together was about the entire restructuring and making sure that it is more tenant focused as opposed to being landlord focused. I think that there's a couple aspects to that. One component of that is that we were going to remove the first stop that when a tenant calls into Jersey City, where they get routed to currently is in a place that's a little bit difficult to find, and it's a little bit convoluted between who they are really working for with regards to getting either paperwork that wasn't filed or actually advocating for the tenants. So the first step is to kind of strip that out and make sure that there is a one stop that you could come to make sure that you have a person there that is advocating for you and your resources, not focused on whether the landlord is filing their paperwork, but more focused on the laws that protect you. Separately, we're going to keep the people in the office that exist there today to focus more directly on the enforcement in regards to the landlord side of the conversation, making sure that they are filing paperwork, because I think one of the things that Jersey City Together has brought forward is the fact that there is this massive gap between what's supposed to be filed and what is actually being filed in that office. And I think by separating the responsibilities between the tenant side of it and what's expected of the landlord side, the hope is, as we discussed last week, is that you get a better delivery of a product to make sure that we retain affordable housing.
Thank you for those steps. Those are good steps in the right direction. A big part of the question, though, is actually around the leadership itself. What can we expect?
Look, what I indicated in private, and I'll indicate it in public, is that I'm committed to changing that office totally. And that means at leadership, and that means at the rank and file level. One of the things I'm not going to do is point a finger at an individual, because I think that the entire office has room to improve, to be certain.
We agree.
So my goal here, and my commitment to you, is that we will restructure that office, wholesale restructuring it, to a way that I think you will be satisfied, is my commitment. And I think ultimately the people who are sitting here will be satisfied as well.
So we can expect big changes.
Big changes in that office and structure, absolutely.
Good. Thank you. Lastly, we've discussed two steps that we believe will raise revenue for the city to improve enforcement and fund nonprofit lawyers to provide eviction defense. The first is a foreclosure registry that other cities have already passed. It should create an additional $3 million in revenue for the city. The second is in raising fees and fines slightly on landlords around rent control. Will you and the city council take action on these steps so that we can fund the enforcement and eviction defense, which, as Liz stated, can possibly avoid 75% of evictions? Will you take the action so we can fund these steps?
Yes, and I will tell you that the commitment from our side is that both of those two separate ordinances will be on the City Council agenda, after this one. And the reason for that, so that's roughly 2 weeks from now, and the reason for that timing is just because I believe the agenda is already being printed for this coming agenda, so the subsequent one will have a first reading on and move forward. But both those actions, yes, we will move forward on, and we'll devote money towards making sure that there is enforcement that is proper and it's properly staffed, and there are lawyers to represent tenants.
Good.
So what I'd like to do is just review what we've accomplished so far here tonight. So we have some really strong commitments from the mayor and from the council president to immediately take action against the man with 1,000 LLCs, right, Joseph Ehrman. Big changes are coming in the tenant landlord office, restructuring it, change in personnel and leadership. I think that deserves applause too. And creating funding mechanism for legal defense for tenants who are battling their landlords, and also for enforcement of the laws that are on the books. I think that's great, right? It's great to hear those commitments from Mayor Fulop and from the council president as we push forward. It's great that the city is planning and to push and to send a message to Mr. Ehrman and hopefully other landlords. There are many of them out there who are doing the same kinds of things. But I think the important thing for us as an organization and for us as residents is not so much what happens tonight, but what happens in the weeks and months ahead. Because we learn, part of it is human nature, right? We're all focused on this right now, but then we all have other things going on, right? We focus on other things. The same is true for our leaders, and so we have to continue to apply pressure. And I thought the example of Union City, right, where Mayor Stack, it's a consistent effort that is made so that residents are aware of their rights and they are not taken advantage of. So I think we need to demand consistency of our leaders, but also consistency from ourselves, right? I encourage you to take a look, and if you have your calendar or your phone, or you want to write it on your hand, right? The next big date, June 18th, here. Right, the mayor is going to return here on June 18th. Is that right, Mayor? I just want to confirm this. June 18th, you will be back here at St. Paul's to report on the progress that has been made on everything that we have talked about tonight. And then also, if you look in your packet, there are 6 dates of Know Your Rights workshops that are coming up with the Waterfront Project. And again, I encourage you, they're all around the city in each of the wards. So to mark those down, the dates and locations, and try to get to one of those and to get the full program. And most important, to share this information with your neighbors, right? Especially for those of you who live in buildings like this or in situations like this, so that your fellow residents are aware of their rights and of the opportunities that are available to them. I was really moved by Reverend Perry's opening, because he's a good pastor in quoting scripture in that beautiful, powerful passage from the prophet Micah. And I should have done that. But I have to say that really what motivates me, yes, it's my faith in God and my love of God's people, but mostly it is my anger. I am angry. Right? I am angry that people who live across the street from my church, people who are parishioners of my church, the people I see on the streets and see in Wonder Bagels and so on, that they have to go home and they have to live in situations like this, and they have to deal with landlords like this. And the thing that maybe surprises me, I was born in Jersey City, raised in Jersey City, but the thing that surprises me is how carefully hidden this all is. Right? How carefully hidden it all is. And so I say enough. Enough. So yes, our love of God's people, our love of God. And so I invite my friend, the Reverend John Brown, to offer a concluding prayer.